carnivore muscle. So, aka carnivore muscle. So the way we initially interacted was you were on some like low carb podcast or something. Somebody just linked it to me.
Und natürlich sind diese Leute nicht nur Carnivore, sondern sie sind auch noch Low Carber obendrauf. Also, ja, oder Keto auch noch oder sowas, ja. Größerer Unfall kann man eigentlich gar nicht mehr sein.
During one of my streams, I just posted in the chat, I can bench 410 pounds, but I'm vegan. How many of you?
Also ich habe noch nie gesehen, dass eine Person verteidigen konnte, auch nur ein Stück Fleisch pro Monat zu essen. Und es gibt Leute, die machen Karnivor Diet. Ja, also kannst dir vorstellen, wie die sich in einer Debatte machen.
You can do that, and led to a whole thing where you were kind of all arguing with me in the chat, and you agreed to debate. And the debate proposition or topic we agreed on
es liegt eine Debate Prop vor, let's go.
Was nutritional aspects of a vegan diet versus a carnivore diet. So the proposition I would make is that a plant-based dietary pattern is superior to a carnivore dietary pattern. There's a few reasons for this. For one thing, plant-based dietary patterns are just associated with longevity, whereas animal-based dietary patterns are associated with more disease, higher mortality rates when we look at perspective.
Was hat der? Was ist denn mit seiner Schulter? Warum ist sie eckig? What the fuck?
Cohort data. So just from those statistics alone, I don't know why you'd follow a carnivore dietary pattern when in prospective cohort data.
Also ganz zu schweigen von der moralischen Komponente. Ne? Hier geht es anscheinend nur um die Ernährungskomponente. Fair enough. Kann man auch machen. Aber I don't know, wie sinnvoll sowas ist. Ja, klar kann man. Aber man kann das machen. Es gibt keine Obligation, das nicht zu machen oder so. Aber es scheitert halt alles an der Moralfrage. Ne? Also warum würdest du das stundenlang diskutieren, um am Ende, meinetwegen der Jonathan gewinnt die Debatte und dann muss er am Ende rechtfertigen, Tiermord rechtfertigen. Kann er nicht rechtfertigen, also was sollte dieses Gequatsche davor?
It's just associated with more disease, earlier mortality. Secondly, plant-based diets are typically lower in saturated fat and cholesterol.
Aber ja, ich denke, ich weiß, wie solche Leute ticken, wie dieser Carnivore-Typ. Die sind so moralisch verkommen, dass man kann die dort nicht rausholen. Niemand kann die rausholen. Du setzt dich mit dem in einen Raum, ganz in Ruhe, 4 Stunden lang kannst mit dem debattieren, alles ausarbeiten, moralisch zeigen, dass er dieselben Axiome hat wie ein Veganer. Kannst ihn in 10 Widersprüche drücken, in 10 Fallacies drücken, der würde niemals aufhören, Tiere zu essen.
Saturated fat and cholesterol raise your serum cholesterol, and that's the principal risk factor for heart disease.
Ganz zu schweigen von der Ernährungskomponente, weil vegane Ernährung natürlich gesünder ist. Guck mal in die Wissenschaft.
This link is also causal, and we can probably debate that a little bit later on. But again, I don't know why you'd follow a dietary pattern which...
Aber versuch mal deine Position zu verteidigen, indem du sagst, man darf Tiere essen, weil es gesünder ist. Lol. Ja, kannst ja versuchen. Steht jedem frei, zu versuchen, diese Position zu verteidigen.
Increases your risk for heart disease. Plant-based diets also contain fiber, whereas carnivore diets contain no fiber at all. Fiber is protective against heart disease.
Das Gesündeste, was es nur gibt auf der Welt, Ballaststoffe. Carnivore Diet, keine Ballaststoffe. Gibt es wieder meinen krummen Daumen dafür hoch, ne? Also, ich sag ja, so ein Unfall kann man gar nicht sein. Also, es ist unfassbar.
Stroke, Type 2 Diabetes, gastrointestinal cancers, again,
ja, Junge, die Wissenschaft zu Ballaststoffen, die ist insane.
I don't know why you'd completely eliminate
Ich habe ja auch ein ganzes Video dazu gemacht.
Fiber from your diet, when fiber is so beneficial. And third, I'd be more concerned with vitamin and mineral deficiencies on a carnivore diet. Particularly with vitamin C. Most carnivore diets, they really only include skeletal muscle tissue. You can eat brain.
Ja, das weiß so und so jeder. Also jeder weiß, dass diese ganzen Leute Bricks kacken. Was ist ein Brick? Also halt Asphalt kacken. Also Ziegelsteine. So, das weiß so und so jeder. Also, ja.
Thalamus gland, that has a bit more vitamin C, but if you're just consuming just skeletal muscle tissue.
Und ich kacke Gras übrigens. Gut verdautes, matschiges Gras. Grünes Zeug.
You're really not getting much vitamin C. There's some interesting research on this, but generally speaking, in order to prevent scurvy,
Da verrotten keine Leichen in meinem Darm. Da liegen keine zerstückelten Tiere in meinem Darm rum.
you need to be consuming at least 10 milligrams per day. That would be very difficult to get if you're only eating
Bestes Düngemittel, right? Der Mensch ist eine Düngemaschine.
skeletal muscle tissue. And even then, you are still likely going to get side effects of vitamin C deficiency.
Ja, okay, wir sehen schon mal, dass hier Vegan Gains allerlei Props ausformuliert. Okay.
So, bad wound healing,
Die Props werden dann wahrscheinlich angegriffen.
weak scar formation, inflammation in the brain, and neurodegenerative diseases long term.
Alter, der hat actually eine eckige Schulter. Sowas habe ich noch nie in meinem Leben gesehen.
Carnivore diets are also
Haferfisch ist auch gut. Und ich habe dich vorhin getimeoutet, weil hier Politik verboten ist.
very low in folate. Folate is particularly important for pregnant women because women with folate deficiencies can have birth defects, so Down syndrome being one of them. And carnivore diets, being free of carbohydrates, also cause
Ja, ich habe auch in meinem Studiendokument die Studie, die vergleicht, wer hat mehr Mängel, Veganer oder Nicht-Veganer. Die Nicht-Veganer haben mehr Mängel. Ziemlich lustig.
dehydration and electrolyte imbalances. This is why you see so many carnivore and low carb keto diet influencers, hucking these electrolyte powders. But even then, just because of the lack of insulin signaling within the kidney,
I mean, jeder kann seine Powder nehmen, Electrolyte Powder, was auch immer. Man kann argumentieren, man kann das als Gegenargument benutzen, indem man sagt, dir fehlt, was daher supplementierst ist, aber es kann ja sein, dass das alles supplementiert, ohne dass es ihm fehlt. Einfach nur, so gesagt, on top, right? Um deine Gesundheit noch mehr zu verbessern. Zum Beispiel, ich trinke Korallenwasser. So, und das hat auch halt extremst viele Mineralstoffe, viel mehr als es normalerweise das Wasser hätte, deswegen ist es auch weiß. Aber ja, vielleicht fehlt es mir ja auch. Aber auch wenn es mir nicht fehlen würde, würde ich das trinken einfach on top, right?
you may not be able to hold on to any of these electrolytes. You still might have some of the side effects of dehydration.
Und übrigens war das Essen gerade verdammt geil, Mann. Mit Lachs und Eiersalat drin. Das ist bis jetzt das Beste, was ich gegessen habe in diesen Sandwiches. In diesen Knusper-Sandwiches. Gerade bei Edeka im Angebot gewesen, beides. Beides Eigenmarke auch, ne? Eigenmarke, veganer Lachs, veganer Eierkäse. Also, ziemlich geil. Halber Preis.
So, muscle cramps, spasms, irregular heart rhythms, just the sensation of dehydration, exhaustion, stuff like that. So those are the basic reasons why I think a plant-based dietary pattern is superior.
That's fair.
Ja, macht euch rein Lachs mit Eiersalat. So geil. Es gibt nichts Besseres. Ich habe schon alles versucht, alles an Wurst und mit Ketchup, mit Barbecue-Soße und Bohnen und Zwiebeln. Da kannst du irgendwie alles vergessen, um ehrlich zu sein. Lachs mit Eiersalat.
Point. First of all, thank you for agreeing to this debate.
Ist so richtig schön saftig und mega intensiv im Geschmack und alles.
Or at least offering it. I was actually following you a number of years back, perhaps 7 or 8 years ago, roughly around that time you started. I can't remember exactly when. I actually enjoyed your debates, discussions, your thought process on things. I'm by no means a anti-vegan person in that sense. I'm not a fan of the vegan diet specifically, though. So I was following you years ago. I wasn't even vegan myself, but I did get quite a bit of entertainment out of your videos back then. So yeah, it's nice to finally sort of sit down and chat with you. If it's all right with you, I'd like to go through each point you made.
Holy shit, sein Akzent ist ja echt übel. Man versteht kaum was.
So you may have to remind me which one. I'm about 2 to 3 weeks out of a.
Gott, wieder am Brabbeln ist er. Das ist ja fürchterlich. Gottes Willen, ey. Hör auf, das auf Deutsch zu übersetzen.
Bodybuilding competition right now, so I'm very lean. My brain is dead. So you may have to
I'm very lean, my brain is dead. Das glaube ich dir sofort.
remind me at points. Yeah, it's not.
So you have to remind me at points. Also da gibt's schon jetzt zu sein, dass er gehirntot ist. Also. Ja, guter Start in der Debatte, also ja. Ja. Okay. Machen wir einfach mal weiter und tun so, als wäre nichts gewesen.
great, but we'll just go for each point. And I understand you've brought up each point and you've said about vitamin C, the requirement levels in your blood, or sorry, your daily intake, the folate, all these things I've heard before. And I understand why you're picking on it, and I understand why you've come to these conclusions. And I think, broadly speaking, at base layer, you're correct in your analysis for what you said. But very
Der hat British accent, ne? Scheiße.
broadly speaking, from the overarching side of things. So, I mean, the first thing I think you said, I believe, was about, was it the...
Okay, mit Untertitel geht's eigentlich.
I'm trying to think now. Pick one of the things you just mentioned. I'll go over it.
The first proposition was just about mortality statistics. So
Sure.
Siehst du, wie ordentlich der Vegan Gains das macht, ne? Die Debatte fängt an und was macht Vegan Gains? Vegan Gains sagt, die erste Proposition, die auf dem Tisch liegt, ist, und dann formuliert er die aus, ne? Genauso sollte jede Debatte starten.
plant-based
Eine Prop liegt auf dem Tisch und diese Prop wird angegriffen. Das ist eine Debatte.
dieters compared to standard American diet, they live longer. So you could look at the Adventist Health Study 2 data, the Oxford vegetarian cohort. People on a plant-based diet just live longer, and they have lower rates of disease. And on top of that, you can look at either substitution or meta-regression analyses on red meat consumption. People who eat more red meat die younger, have higher rates of disease. People who replace red meat with other foods do better. You can look at the Nurses Health Study, Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. Those are two really good cohorts. Again, just based on that,
Alle natürlich in meinem Studiendokument.
I don't know why you'd follow
Unter Kategorie Vegan-Studien.
a dietary pattern that's pretty much just made up of red meat.
Sure. Yeah. So the key words here you've used throughout the first part of your explanation was about association. Also, we can't draw causality from association. It's a way, association is something where we look at something, look at two things. Yeah, they kind of match up a bit, but you can look at the trend between, I don't know, ice cream sales and shark attacks. They go up. Doesn't necessarily mean there's something to it. So we have to look to the next step, the next hierarchy of evidence, perhaps mechanistic data, things like that. She made a point about
mechanistic
cholesterol.
data is lower on the evidence hierarchy than prospective cohorts, for one thing. So prospective cohorts sit above mechanistic data. Secondly, Secondly, I think we have a big disagreement here because you can make causal inferences from associations. All nutrition research is associative or correlative. That's true of randomized trials. That's true of prospective cohorts. That's true of cross-sectional studies. They're all fundamentally predicated on the same idea. If you see a correlation between an exposure and an outcome, you can likely make a causal inference. And there's certain, and you talked about ice cream and its association with, I don't know, crime or something. When the association is logical, so if there's a logical, kind of inference you can make that, okay, these two things are probably related, like smoking and lung cancer, you could say, okay, if we're seeing the correlation here, and by the way, there's never been any randomized trials on smoking and lung cancer. The only
Rauchen ist vielleicht gar nicht ungesund. Wir haben nur Korrelation. Und so kannst du diese Clowns auch debunken.
studies that exist are cohorts. So based on cohort data alone, we know
Weil wir beim Rauchen nur Kohortenstudien haben, nichts anderes.
there's a
Weil es natürlich unmoralisch wäre, die Menschen dazu zu zwingen, zu rauchen, um zu gucken, ob die davon Krebs kriegen.
causal association between
Es gibt ja bei Studien immer einen Ethikrat, das erstmal drauf guckt.
smoking and lung cancer. It's just that the correlation is strong, consistent, and consistent enough, and there's a logical reason for why we think these two things are related, why we make a causal inference there. So you absolutely can make causal inferences from prospective cohort data. Do you disagree with that, or?
Alter, was trinkt er da eigentlich immer? Was ist das? Weiß jemand, was er da trinkt? Was ist das? Cola oder was soll das sein? Ich habe noch nie so eine Dose gesehen.
Say it is a useful tool to provide a measurement or a yardstick, but you have to use that against other studies, other pieces of data. So my broad understanding is that you have different pieces of data sets, some associative, some causal, some mechanistic, some empirical, some epidemiological. They all kind of come together to make something. My issue is that some pieces of information are perhaps misguiding people. So you mentioned earlier about the red meat, I believe it's red meat consumption increases, I think you said risk of heart disease and mortality. Problem with that is most of those studies that I've seen, at least the ones personally I've seen, they're calling hamburgers, cheese, bun, lettuce, pickle, sauce as red meat. Do you see what I mean? So it's a confounding variable. It affects the actual outcome of the study because you're not comparing like for like. So it'd be like saying a vegan diet is good for you. There's different levels of vegan diets. There's a vegan diet of purely processed food. There's a vegan diet of whole foods, which is probably going to be better. Therefore we could say, is it a meat-based diet or is it a meat and Pepsi Cola based diet? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
That's one of my issues with the studies.
Yeah, so two things. Researchers understand this when they're getting these food surveys completed. So they will classify fresh red meat and processed red meat. So if somebody's having like, I don't know, a Big Mac with like bacon and stuff on it, they're not just classifying that as red meat.
Big Mac mit Bacon? Was redet der? Also der Vegan Gains redet sich gerade um Kopf und Kragen. Ey. What?
That's processed red meat. So they are at least making that kind of differentiation. Second,
Niemand isst Bacon auf seinen Big Mac. Was redest du da? Warum hast du nicht gesagt Big Tasty oder sowas? Fucking Bacon auf dem Big Mac. Vegan Gains, come on. Get your shit together.
they're very particular with these surveys, and they make sure they're asking these food survey questionnaires in a way where they can eliminate confounding variables. So if somebody is like having steak, but they're having steak with like a ton of vegetables and everything, that's also going to show up in the survey, and they are going to be able to extrapolate out.
Ja, indem sie zum Beispiel das Gemüse kalkulieren nach Gewicht, also nach Menge, und das rauskalkulieren als Confounding Faktor. Lul.
How much vegetables people are consuming, how much fresh food people are consuming, how much red.
Wie viel Weizen wird rausgerechnet? Weizen ist der Bann. Und schon bist du beim Fleisch only angekommen.
Meat people are consuming, and they're going to be able to use that data to be able to tell, okay, is it the red meat or is it some other dietary variable?
Yep.
And secondly, thirdly, there's substitution analyses. So they look at the results that they would expect to see from substituting portions of red meat with other food. So if you were to substitute red meat with poultry, or substitute red meat with fish, or with nuts or seeds or beans, there's substitution analyses, which also makes that much less likely, where, okay, well, they're just comparing people eating like a chickpea salad to people who are eating Big Macs. It's not really how that sort of data works.
Okay, am I correct in saying that some of these particular food groups, so for example, red meat from a cow from a field, is being separated in that study against red meat processed, mashed up into a ball, turned into a patty or something?
Yes.
That's differentiated. Okay, yeah. That's news to me. I didn't know that.
You can actually, a lot of these researchers, you can actually message them and ask about this stuff. A lot of them are willing to talk to you. And
Ja, wissen wir doch alle. Mardev ist ziemlich aufmerksam, ja. Wissen wir doch alle. Die Kühe stehen draußen überall herum. Seht ihr das nicht? Die stehen ja draußen alle herum. Das ist ja ganz klar. Alle Tiere laufen draußen herum, weil die sind ja humane und sowas, weil es gibt ja keinen Mensch, der Supermarktzeug kauft. Alle kaufen nur Bio vom Bauern nebenan. Und daher ich gucke hier raus und ich sehe überall Tiere rumlaufen. Da sind 100 Kühe, da sind 3000 Chicken und jedes Tier hat ein Fußballfeld Platz. Also, ja. So ganz normal, oder nicht?
and you can have like email correspondence with them. In modern epidemiological studies, these food questionnaire surveys are extremely sophisticated. So it's not like, again, it's not like you're comparing people who are just eating, Big Macs to people who are eating otherwise healthy diets. They're extremely sophisticated nutrition surveys. They know what is processed to what degree, and they're able to separate, processed sources from fresh sources.
Okay, yeah. So that's news to me. If it is in fact true, that's news to me. I've not read that myself, but
Ja, du wirst noch viele News erleben in diesem Video, in dieser Debatte.
One thing I'd like to look at is the idea of a survey. Now, obviously, one of the variables or one of the issues that I'd say with the surveys is how far back in time are they measuring? For example, if I ate a steak this morning, I can remember that I ate a steak this morning. Now, what did I eat 3-4 weeks ago? I probably did eat a steak that morning, but if I was on a mixed macronutrient standard Western diet, processed foods, 20, 30 different ingredients or items in a given day, how am I going to remember or recall accurately what I've eaten and how much? Do you understand? That's a limitation I have with that kind of.
That's not how most nutritional surveys are conducted. So you can look at the recent prospective cohort study linking red meat with type 2 diabetes. It was published by Harvard. They're using data from the Nurses Health Study and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. They usually don't require you to do any dietary recall. They just give you a sheet, and for that particular day, they have you write out, exactly what you're eating. So they'll just give you a long set of sheets, and you can check off each box for what you ate that day. And sometimes they do this weekly, so they'll send you out one of these food surveys weekly, and then you fill it out for that day, what you ate. And then they do this for years. And they're able, and there's like no need for any sort of dietary recall. You just fill out the sheet that day. So you're not trying to recall what you ate 3-4 weeks ago or 2 months ago or a year ago. So these food frequency questionnaires, they're as precise as you can possibly get.
Ja, das habe ich früher auch falsch gesagt. Mit diesem Dankeschön, Konst. Früher habe ich auch gesagt, habe ich in Question gezogen, diese Questionnaire-Studies, wo man einfach nur die Menschen befragt und du kreuzt einfach irgendwas an, ne? Questionnaire-Studies, keine Ahnung, wie heißt das auf Deutsch? Fragebogenstudien, right? Das Ding ist, es gibt ein Paper, worauf sich alle beziehen, die ganzen übelsten Debate-Pros, vor allem Nutrivore und sowas auch, ne? Die Spitze des Eisbergs. Es gibt ein Paper, das zeigt, dass Questionnaire Studies fast genauso gut, ich weiß nicht, wie ist die Übereinstimmung, ist schon Ewigkeiten her, irgendwie 92% oder sowas, Übereinstimmung mit Studien mit zum Beispiel RCTs oder Kohortenstudien oder sowas. Wenn du 2 Studien machst, einmal nur Questionnaire und einmal RCT oder Kohortstudie, kommt das gleiche bei beiden raus. So, es ist unglaublich, wie gut die Questionnaire-Studies sind. Und jetzt denk mal zum Beispiel an den Punkt Hunde- und Katzenernährung. Das sind ja Questionnaire-Studies. Also vegane Hunde- und Katzenernährung.
Fair enough, okay.
Also da, ne, mit diesem, dass die Studien so schlecht sind, ne, diese Position habe ich auch mittlerweile verworfen. Weil tatsächlich wir Wissenschaft dazu haben, wie effektiv die sind.
Yeah, that's news to me.
Ganz genau, das hat er gerade gesagt, ne? Nochmal. Hier sagt er es auch.
These food frequency questionnaires, they're as precise as you can possibly get.
Ja.
Fair enough, okay. Yeah, that's news to me, of course, but my sort of concern
Habe ich doch gesagt, da kommen noch viele News, ne? Jetzt sagt er wieder, das sind News für mich.
would be, okay.
Ist es denn gut, seinen Tieren veganes Essen zu geben? Yes. Erstens musst du es, weil du es ja moralisch nicht anders vertreten kannst. Du kannst es ja nicht moralisch vertreten, den Tiere zu füttern. Und zweitens ist es gesünder in Studien mit Katzen und mit Hunden. Alle Paper findest du in meinem Studiendokument.
Hey, you filled out these sheets
Oder du guckst mein Video dazu. Aber erst nach dem Stream.
and you said what you've eaten. Now, at what point do you delineate where you can say that red meat is totally the causal factor? I mean, obviously, a person eating, I don't know, a burger or something is going to have other ingredients with that burger. Do you see what I mean? So, although you can say, okay, I ate a steak that day, I also put a load of ketchup on it.
Das hatten wir doch gerade. Der hat es immer noch nicht verstanden, okay?
I added some, I don't know, pickles or some Doritos or something. Do you see how, like, you can add more things to that food? So how do you specify it was the beef on your plate that, is causal towards mortality risk and heart
Yeah,
disease?
so again, they don't look at raw data, and they try to find if there's any associations with certain dietary patterns. So obviously there's going to be certain dietary patterns associated with people who consume a lot of processed food. So if you're eating more processed red meat from like McDonald's, you're probably also eating more sugary sodas, stuff like that, or candy, Oreos. So you can adjust for those variables, and you can make adjustments to the data so that you're
So make
comparing
up
like
data.
for like. No, it's not making up data. It's statistical adjustments to adjust for these confounding variables. And again,
So where do these numbers come from, if that makes sense? Where do these, okay, that's an extra 50 grams of protein-free beef. Where does that come from?
what do you mean?
So you mentioned adjusted data sets. So if you're making an adjustment to data, did that data actually come out in fruition? It was someone ate that food, or is it oh, we're thinking this might have happened, so we're adding this onto the study in terms of what we're going to look at and understand?
So you have to make a lot of adjustments to data. There's a lot of confounding variables. So there's things like BMI, there's things like smoking, there's things like alcohol consumption. You can predict in your model how much consumption of these things, so like per, I don't know, bottle of beer you drink, or per cigarette you smoke, how much that's going to impact your risk of all-cause mortality or a particular disease. You can basically normalize all groups by making adjustments to the data that account for cigarette smoking, alcohol consumption, and that gives you a like-for-like comparison where even though, say, a group that ate more red meat total, they also smoked more, drank more. Because you know the...
Ja, du kannst ja einfach rauskalkulieren. Weil der eine sagt, es raucht so viel und das kannst du ja rauskalkulieren.
expected increase in risk.
Da steht da immer bei RR oder HR zum Beispiel so ein Sternchen. Beim Sternchen steht dann adjusted for und dann stehen da BMI, Gehalt, Gemüsekonsum und so weiter. Ne? Die sind nicht dumm, diese Leute, die Studien machen.
From drinking and smoking, you can make adjustments to the data set that account for that variable so that you're only accounting for the variable you care about, which is like red meat consumption.
Okay, so apologies if you just explained this, but does that account for confirmation bias, i.e. you've got a guy that's vegan, goes for a run every day, eats whole foods, versus a guy that eats the steak and chips, fries?
Well, again, those are other confounding variables. So exercise would be another variable that's adjusted for. That's something that you can account for in a statistical model. There are healthy diet scores. So you can look at the intake of fresh or processed food. There's various different food processing categories that you can use. And again, you can account for that in a statistical model so that you're only looking at particular foods and how they associate with a given, disease or outcome. And then you can have a like-for-like comparison where you're eliminating these other confounding variables of, okay, did they just exercise more? Did they just eat a healthier overall diet?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's more of a difference of opinion, but for me personally, I'm not a big fan of adjusted data sets.
You have to, if you just look at raw data, you will get ridiculous shit.
Was hat der da gerade gesagt? Der mag keine adjusted data? Was redest du denn da? Hast du nicht gerade selbst angezweifelt, dass das nicht adjustiert ist und dass das Problem ist? Und jetzt hast du was dagegen, wenn es adjustiert ist? Was?
There was the epic European study that all these carnivore dieters love to reference because they found no association between saturated fat consumption and heart disease. Well, they didn't make any adjustments in their data set, so you saw a lot of ridiculous shit. Smoking was actually correlated with lower rates of heart disease. So the more you smoked, the higher the rates of heart disease.
Ja, das passiert, wenn du nicht adjustierst. Das ist ja das ganze Ding.
The more saturated fat you consumed, the lower the rates of heart disease. People who are fatter, higher BMI, lower rates of heart disease. And that's because they didn't use any proper adjustments in their model. Once they act...
Ja, natürlich werden die Carnivore-Leute genau dieses Paper zitieren, was auch sonst. Das sind, wie diese Menschen mal sind, so sind sie halt. Ne?
Actually did the...
Genauso wie Eierleute, Eieresser so unredlich sind, dass die genau das Paper zitieren werden, das zeigt, dass Eieressen den Cholesterinspiegel nicht anhebt. Obwohl wir Metabolic Ward-Studien dazu haben. Also, es sind einfach, man kann schon fast sagen, Bösartigkeit. Ne? Einfach nur eklig.
Adjustments in the follow-up study where they adjusted for healthcare expenditures. They did find those associations. Smoking was associated with heart disease. Obesity was associated with heart disease. Saturated fat was associated with heart disease. So you absolutely need statistical adjustments when you're doing these models. Otherwise, you'll just get stupid, nonsensical, random shit.
Sure, yeah. Okay, I understand where you're coming from now. I think the literature we have is always going to be limited. I think we'll probably agree on that point. But you are correct in a sense. People are going to watch us and think, oh, this guy's given up on the argument already. It's not quite that. It's just that we have a limited amount of resources and ability to actually make these true studies, lock-in studies.
I would say we have a pretty good, robust amount of data showing that certain dietary patterns are preferable to others. Again, there have been quite a lot of prospective cohorts conducted, very well controlled, And consistently, over and over and over again, you see plant-based dietary patterns winning out. Consistently, you see red meat being associated with chronic disease and earlier mortality. So I wouldn't say that. Like, we're always going to have some limits in our understanding.
Ich schicke auch auf meinem Discord-Server in der Wissenschaftsraum, schicke ich auch mal wieder neue Studien zu Veganismus und zu Fleisch und sowas rein. Hab erst letztens ein Paper reingeschickt von 2024.
There's always going to be some research that we can't do due to ethical reasons. Like, we can't have randomized trials on cigarette smoking because of the ethics involved. But the data we do have is strong enough to make inferences with a very high degree of confidence that, yeah, these plant-based dietary pattern is preferable.
Sure. So I'm going to take a different swing at this, but obviously feel free to swing it back in the direction that you prefer. So I think it's pretty safe to say that at least short term, a whole food, vegan or vegetarian diet is probably better in like an initial period of time, in a studied period of time, for most people going for a Western diet. And I think that would be because of the potential alleviation of the Randall cycle. So by default, by eating more plants, you're typically eating less fat. Therefore, you've not got two substrates in the bloodstream competing to get into the cell. So I think that's why we see a lot of vegan or vegetarian plant-based diets, what have you, ceasing a lot of heart disease, diabetes, because they're reducing that gradient of the Randall cycle. Would that be a fair statement to make?
No. So if you look at the Adventist Health Study, I think that had 7 years follow-up. The Oxford Vegetarian Cohort, I think that was at least 12 years of follow-up. Might have been something like 15. Like, you're talking about studies where there's roughly a decade's worth of follow-up. So they're following participants for roughly a decade or more. And again, the people on the plant-based diets are doing better over the course
Ich bin der Owner des Discord-Servers, ja.
of a decade or more. So no, I wouldn't say in the short term. This seems
Would that
fairly
account
long
for
term.
healthy user bias?
Yes. And
You sure?
Yeah. So again, you can look at the adjustments they made to all of these data sets. They adjust for socioeconomic status, smoking, education, exercise. They account for a lot of variables. So in all likelihood, it's the dietary differences between these groups that are accounting for the differences in health outcomes.
Okay. Would you say that there was any conflict of interest in those Adventist health studies?
None that affected the data. So I think there may have been some researchers who were Adventists themselves, but I only really care about data. Like, if you sent me a study that was funded by the tobacco industry or funded by the meat and dairy industry, as long as the study is conducted well, the methodology is sound, the way they collected data is sound, doesn't matter who funded it or who the researchers are or what biases they have, as long as the study's good, that's all that matters.
Sure. So I know a number of people that have looked at different studies like the ones you've mentioned, and they come through it from the angle that if you actually look at the raw data, it doesn't always show what they've made it out to show through like the abstract conclusions. Have you ever noticed that yourself with things that you've read?
Well, yeah, if you look
Like, you've
at
actually looked at the raw data.
Well, yeah, if you look at raw data, well, like I just mentioned, there's the EPIC European study. When you look at raw data, smoking reduced heart disease risk, obesity reduced heart disease risk. So people who are fatter also tend to be more wealthy, and they can spend more on healthcare, and they can prevent some of the and even though they're fatter and they have like a higher risk of
Ja, mehr Geld heißt mehr Körperfett, ja.
some of these chronic diseases, because they can afford medications for it. Because if they have like a medical emergency, they can go to the hospital, afford treatment. Some other effects of their diet might also be better, even though they're fatter. So poor people might have to eat like just rice for months because they can't afford any other food. But somebody who's fatter, okay, yeah, they're eating some more junk foods, some more unhealthy foods, but they're getting a lot more variety in their diet. So they might have just a more robust kind
Ja, und die haben auch bessere Gesundheitsversorgung.
of body that's resistant against infections or accidents or anything like that. So unless you make adjustments to the data, again, you're going to get silly outcomes. We all know obesity is terrible for you. We all know that, cigarette smoking's bad for you. But if you're going to make the argument, well, you got to look at the raw data. Well, if you look at the raw data, I guess smoking's good for you. By the way, the tobacco industry actually used this in their marketing to scam consumers. They were conducting, these sort of cohort studies without making adjustments to the data indicating socioeconomic status. And they found that cigarette smoking was associated with lower risk of all-cause mortality, lower risk of heart disease. So when you
Rauchen gesund. Hier hört ihr es.
don't see adjustments to the data, I'd say that's probably a higher risk that there's bias involved.
That's an interesting take. I think, like I said before, we're just so limited on the data we do have. I'm going to draw this to a slightly different direction, so I'm interested to see how you tackle this argument. We see a lot of carnivores, at least I do. I'm a nutrition and exercise
Jetzt geht's los.
coach online. I spoke to hundreds of people that are on a carnivore diet. I've seen probably thousands of testimonials that I've read, seen, or heard online. Now, why is it that
Boah, ich überlege echt am Sonntag vielleicht die Wahlen zu streamen. Boah, aber ich weiß nicht, ich muss mir echt gut überlegen, Mann.
all of these carnivores are reversing arterial plaque through gold standard, testing? They're saying the remission of
Ich werde einfach nur streamen und nichts sagen.
type 2 diabetes, this sort of thing. So my question now is to you. Obviously, you made the points about the vegan plant-based diets with associated studies which suggest this. Then obviously they're comparing that, like you said, like for like, using adjusted data sets against probably a standard Western diet with a mixed macronutrient composition. Now, how are you going to disprove a carnivore diet, assuming that, like I just said,
Hat er doch schon gesagt mit Studien.
people are having all these sort of
Es gibt ja Studien gegen Tierprodukte ohne Ende. Also gegen Tierprodukte allgemein gibt es Zehntausende von Studien. Aber es gibt ja, ich habe in meinem Studiendokument alleine irgendwie 50 Studien gegen Low Carb schon alleine. Also Low Carb im Sinne von Tierprodukte, Low Carb.
like CAC
Keto auch, Anti-Keto-Studien habe ich auch.
scores go down, HbA1c, fasting, blood glucose, all these sort of things. Why are these people becoming healthy if meat was such a cool
Warum werden die gesünder? Oh mein Gott. Was für Kacknoob-Fragen, ey. Ja, jetzt versteht man, warum der Karnivor Diet macht. Der hat halt, seine Epistemology ist halt auf Null.
causal factor of heart disease and mortality?
Give me one.
Hey, ich bin Raucher. Ich rauche. Ja, hier. Das beste Beispiel, um diesen Schwachsinn aufzudecken, ist Gene Cormant zu zitieren. Ja, nicht zu zitieren, sondern anzubringen. Gene Cormant, ja. Eine Frau in Frankreich. Mit was hat er angefangen zu rauchen? Mit 13 oder sowas? Hat 90 oder 98 Jahre ihres Lebens geraucht und ist die älteste Frau der Welt geworden, 122. Noch Fragen? Warum ist sie nicht krank geworden? Warum ist sie die älteste Frau der Welt geworden? Sie raucht doch. Warum sind diese Karnivoren? Warum werden die auf einmal gesund und alles? Ja, rate mal. Du darfst 3-mal raten.
Second.
Sure.
I want to share a paper with you.
Es ist einfach nur traurig.
Here we go. Do you see that?
I see it, yeah.
Okay, I don't think that's the right window, but if I bring it over here, there we go. So behavioral characteristics and self-reported health status among 2029
Oh, da, Karnivor Diet, ja. Let's go.
adults consuming a carnivore diet. So
I'm familiar.
this is the only study currently looking at
Also sage ich doch, da gibt es nicht viel zu. That's the only study.
a carnivore diet on health outcomes. So a lot of this relied on just self-reporting. So, it's people reporting, oh, I felt better, my skin improved, I had an autoimmune issue before, it went away.
Ja, wie viele Menschen fühlen sich besser, wenn die anfangen zu rauchen? Wird es genug geben? Tausende, Hunderttausende. Vor allem ganz zu schweigen, wenn die lange ein paar Tage nicht geraucht haben und dann rauchen. Oh, geht's mir gut? Oh, fühle ich mich gut? Oh, ja, genau. Ist deswegen Rauchen gesund?
Stuff like that. They
Sure.
did look, so some of these people did get CAC scores before and after the study. If you look at, here we go. So table 4, self-reported, current and pre-diet anthropometrics and laboratory studies. So if you go down here to the CAC scores, so this tab is pre-diet, that a CAC score of 55, post-diet or current, it's 81. So on average, their coronary artery calcium went up, which shows they're actually having progression of atherosclerosis. And I think this was only over a period of a few months, which is pretty frightening if you're getting increases in your coronary artery calcium score over the course of only a few months.
Do you think that it's perhaps possible that the carnivore diet was reducing plaque, but that's happening over a longer period of time? So it's initially building up before it's actually flushed out, you know, in essence. I mean, I'm looking here at where it
What?
says Q3. I think it says
Hat er das gerade wirklich gesagt?
132. Is that right? Okay.
Das ist angestiegen, bevor es abgeflacht ist? Fragt er. What?
Can't quite read it. On the far bottom right. Then I'm looking at...
Well, this is the mean.
Oh, sorry. I couldn't even read that. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Okay, so the CAC has gone up. Why do you think that might be?
Well, I would assume it's primarily due to just elevated serum cholesterol. Their serum cholesterol was all very high. If you look at their LDL-C, pre-diet, it was 126. That was the median. And post-diet, it was 172. So they had roughly a 50-point increase in their serum cholesterol score. There may be some other factors with the carnivore diet that might
Median LDL-C von über 120. Ach du Elend.
be particularly bad for artery calcification. Could have something to do with a lack of antioxidants in the diet, particularly like vitamin E. Who knows? But we know LDL is the principal risk factor for heart disease. And when you see calcified plaques, the volume of plaque that is calcified increasing generally indicates more severe atherosclerosis.
Sure. So obviously we're contending the points of the CAC, which is something I think is a much more important. I mean, in my opinion, the LDL, HDL, things like that are more artifact numbers of what just happens to be in your blood at that point of time. I'd be looking at something like a CAC score more as a gold standard, so I'll be looking at that data. But then the other problem I have is that it's hard to really have a hierarchy of which blood markers are the most important. So if we go down this list, I can't quite read it that way, so apologies. But if you look, for example, at the HbA1c before and after the diet,
Sure.
so along there, yeah, I think we can see that goes down. Is that correct?
It didn't improve. So the median was 5.3 pre-diet, and the median post-diet was 5.3.
Same.
So no improvement.
Interesting.
And that's something that you actually see in general. So with these low-carb ketogenic diets, you usually don't see either significant improvements or any improvements at all in HbA1c. That's likely because, again, the way, like, just the aspects of this diet are just not conducive to good insulin sensitivity. So low-carb diets reduce insulin sensitivity, and especially if they're high in saturated fat. Saturated fat is bad for insulin sensitivity, and red meat is also highly associated with type 2 diabetes. So even though your blood glucose is going down and net insulin secretion is going down, your HbA1c probably isn't really going to improve that much, if at all, just because these sorts of diets make you more diabetic.
I would have to disagree. The reason why I say that is I'm typically, this is anecdotal, so I appreciate it's not a study by any means, but I'm seeing most people's HbA1c go down, especially if it's significantly high to begin with. Then I'm also seeing that after a period of time, people's HbA1c will slightly elevate. When I say elevate, I mean go up by about 0.5 on the scale or something. And the reason why we believe that, the pathology behind that, is because the red blood cells will last longer and they've got a better ability to prevent glycation and things like that. Would you say that's a fair point? Or is it something you looked at all?
That's not something I have looked at all. But again, we do know that certain dietary patterns are more associated with type 2 diabetes. So this was vegetarian diets and incidence of type 2 diabetes in the Adventist Health Study 2. And basically what they found was vegans had the lowest risk of type 2 diabetes out of any diet group. So
that doesn't surprise me because it alleviates the Randall cycle. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Like if we combine fat and carbs in a meal, if you eat a chocolate bar versus a bag of Skittles, the Skittles, yeah, they'll spike it really quick, but also drop much quicker. But we see with the protein and fat, sorry, the carbs and fat together, it tends to just like elevate and stay elevated for a longer period of time. So is it fair to say that a diet which focuses primarily on omitting one of the two main energy substrates is beneficial for health
No.
outcomes and does like things like that?
I would say most people would probably benefit from having 20 to 30% of their calories coming from fat, but with most of that being in the form of mono and polyunsaturated fats and avoidance of saturated fat. Saturated fat is the macronutrient that is most implicated in type 2 diabetes risk. So I don't think it's because of avoidance of fat, period. I think it's avoidance of saturated fat.
Okay, so saturated fat's the main problematic ingredient, you think. How would you argue that with someone that's saying the N15 isotope data says we ate primarily 80% roughly plus ruminant meat, which would be largely saturated fat if we cut a bit of fat off an animal? How comes we weren't seeing people diabetic and severely ill with all these other things, you know, over a millennia sort of thing? But we look at, for example, the ancient Egyptians, we can see 10, 12,000 years ago, they had heart disease and all sorts of new modern day diseases.
Da sind eine Menge Tabs offen. Heiliger.
And they incorporated grains into their diet, which was the new thing on the block.
So if you look at the Horus study, they looked at mummified remains of various different ancient populations, including hunter-gatherers from Africa. So they looked at African hunter-gatherers, Eskimos, ancient Egyptians, a lot of different ancient...
Ja, das ist ein guter Punkt, zumal das ja lediglich ein Beispiel ist. Es gibt ja viele Outcomes, die in diese Richtung zeigen. Müsste schon ein riesiger Zufall sein, dass die alle ähnlich sind, ja. Und das ist auch noch so ein super Punkt. Komisch, dass diese Studien so gut wie immer in eine Richtung zeigen. Sehr, sehr seltsam, oder? Zufall. Die zeigen alle zufällig fast alle in diese Richtung. Sehr seltsam.
Cultures, they all had atherosclerosis. All of them, regardless of...
Ja, das ist diese Lügengeschichte von, die waren so gesund und sowas. Was für ein unsäglicher Blödsinn.
Whether they were eating, quote-unquote modern foods with grains, wheat, or if they just hunted their food, stuff like that. All of them had atherosclerosis. So this isn't a new thing. It seems like every single human society has always had atherosclerosis. There is also probably diabetes in every human culture. I think the Greeks were the first ones to formally describe diabetes. They described it as a wasting disease, and they would diagnose it by tasting sweet urine, so glucose in the urine. So because they're not absorbing glucose into their muscle tissue or body cells, they're just excreting it. The diabetes is mostly genetic, or I should say genetics are what cocks the gun for diabetes. There's about 17 different genes, maybe more, that are associated with diabetes. If you don't have any of those genes, you could be fat as hell, you could be 500 pounds, and your HbA1c, your blood glucose, it'll all be fine. You can talk to plenty of clinicians who've seen this. You can get massive, massive fat asses who aren't diabetic.
Sure.
So you need those genes, and you also need to have some lifestyle factors that, that pull the trigger. So obviously obesity is the biggest risk factor, but again, these dietary patterns where you're consuming a lot of saturated fat, red meat, that seems to be the kind of dietary pattern, especially in the context of...
Heute während der Arbeit habe ich das.
Habe ich das was? Deine Nachricht ist abgeschnitten. Oh. Poste ruhig in den Chat, ich lese dann vor. Da kommt noch eine Dono? Nee, glaube ich nicht. Ich glaube, der hat Copy-Paste falsch gemacht. Die Hälfte vergessen. Vielen Dank, Zuckerinsel, für den Mega-Support. 2000 Bits. Vielen, vielen Dank. Vielleicht, du kannst einfach die Nachricht in den Chat schreiben. Ich lese die gerne vor. Vielen Dank für den Mega-Support heute. Zuckerinsel ist wieder eingeschlagen wie eine Bombe.
Okay. I'm going to throw this one at you. So, we're talking about diabetes now. So, type 2 diabetes, is it fair to say, well, I think it is, it's measured, caused by excessive chronic elevated blood glucose. So, for example, if I do a blood test right now...
I would say that's a
Can you
side
explain?
effect, not a cause.
Okay, so how would you underpin the pathology of diabetes? And I know you said it's from saturated fat in your opinion. So how would carbs come into it?
Yeah, so type 2 diabetes...
Ich habe mein iPad gerade kaputt gemacht, weil er die Nachricht selbst geschickt hat. Du meinst, während der Arbeit hast du dein iPad kaputt gemacht? Das ist gar nicht gut, Mann. Der hat die Nachricht selbst geschickt, was? Der macht das alleine?
Diabetes is impaired
Wollte noch, ach so, ist hingefallen oder was?
insulin response and
Shit.
insulin sensitivity. So direct damage to the pancreas, which saturated fat does cause direct damage to the pancreas. And saturated fat also impairs insulin action. So if you have a big meal of like butter and cheese and lard, if you have carbohydrate along with that meal, you will see that insulin action is also inhibited. So your blood sugar is going to stay elevated longer. So those two things combined contribute to type 2 diabetes, impaired insulin action, and impaired insulin sensitivity. And of course, obesity also impairs insulin sensitivity. There's different mechanisms in which that occurs. So just being fatter, some of that adipose tissue, I think that causes like a spillover effect where there's just more free fatty acids in your bloodstream at any one time. That impairs insulin action. Obesity also increases intramyocellular lipid count. There's a bit of debate over whether or not intramyocellular lipids are actually responsible because athletes also have elevated intracellular myolipids. So might be the reason why they're there that causes, inhibited insulin action. But yeah, it's not caused from elevated blood glucose. That's just a side effect of impaired insulin action and insulin sensitivity.
Okay, so what?
Gerade das Weird Flex Debunk Video gesehen von mir oder was? Ja. Der Typ reagiert immer, dieser Hulk da. Richtig krasser Omni und so. Der reagiert immer auf alle, die irgendwas über ihn sagen und die debunked die und sowas, ja. Komisch, dass er auf mich nicht reagiert hat. Sehr, sehr.
Ich habe heute während der Arbeit ein Video von deiner Debatte. Was erzählt er denn da? Dann habe ich dreifach schneller gearbeitet.
Weil ich war so wütend auf Omnis. Okay. Ja, aber du hast dreimal so schnell gearbeitet, ist doch schon, das ist doch wenigstens etwas. Vielen Dank für deine nochmal 2000 Bits, unglaublich. Ein Video von meiner Debatte. Ja, morgen kommt die Debatte von mir gegen Sid, der auf dem Discord. Ziemlich cool. Könnt ihr euch schon mal freuen, ist echt cool.
What do you say? I know this is anecdotal, so it's...
Politische Blockbuster-Video, ja. Tja, ja. Wer weiß. Der Preis ist heiß.
That sounds a bit... Okay, so what would you say? I know this is anecdotal, so it sounds a bit hypocritical for me saying it, but it's a valid sort of point for you to argue against. What would you say to all the people out there that are following a carnivorous diet right now, or low carb or keto or anything along that sort of spectrum, that are saying, oh, my HbA1c is going down, my fasting glucose, all these sort of numbers? Because I see this across the board. I personally don't meet anyone that I've coached that hasn't had a significant amount of their health markers improved from a carnivore diet.
Yeah, so when you're just...
Das hatten wir auch schon, der wiederholt einfach die Fragen. Ich weiß nicht, der hört einfach nicht zu wahrscheinlich. Ich meine, der hat selbst am Anfang gesagt, dass er hirntot ist. So.
Just looking at blood sugar specifically, if you're eating a very low carbohydrate diet, you would expect to see lower blood sugar because you're not really eating sugar. So that's a way to manage the disease. But it doesn't actually mean the disease is improving. It could actually be worsening. You could actually have worse insulin action, worse insulin sensitivity. It's just that you're managing the disease by using novel methods to lower blood sugar.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you made a point earlier about, like, if you eat too much fat, yes, it will make you diabetic. I do agree. I think for most people, it's an ingredient in the recipe which can cause diabetes. I think that is the least problematic in my opinion. And the reason why I say it is because if we look at our skeletal and liver glycogen stores, we're looking at, it's under 1,000 grams a day, stored glucose, muscle glycogen, things like that. Now, if we look at our body fat, we can look at perhaps thousands of grams of saturated fat contained on our body right now. In that, what I'm saying is there's a bigger pool for the fat acids to go into, but there's a limited pool for carbohydrates through muscle glycogen. So what's going to happen to someone if, say, they have elevated blood glucose from excessive carbohydrate consumption, given that they're spilling over as in they've filled up that bucket? Because obviously you can't just have a load of sugar floating through your bloodstream. It's got to go to be used as energy through the ATP for the mitochondria, to create ATP for the mitochondria, or go into skeletal muscle or liver glycogen or brain glycogen, glucose. So do you see what I mean? You kind of like, you're stuck in this like pool. You've got this limited bucket.
That sounds more like a problem of excessive caloric consumption.
Ja, wollte ich gerade sagen, lol.
And I mean, I think it's a decent heuristic to say we should have a balanced diet. I don't think we should eat like 80 or 90% of our calories coming from carbohydrate. Based on the data, it seems like anywhere from 30 to 60 seems to be the sweet spot in terms of percentage. Again, around 30% coming from protein.
Ja, bei mir ungefähr 50% kommen aus Kohlenhydraten.
Maybe a bit more, a bit less, depending on some of your athletic needs and how you feel it satiates you. Again, around 20-30% coming from total fat. So I don't see that being a problem for your average person. If you're diabetic or insulin insensitive, you can use novel methods to control your blood sugar. So you can, eat some more monopolyunsaturated fats. That's not going to, spike your blood sugar because it's fat. You can eat more protein. So you can eat things like tofu or seitan, and you can fill the rest with like fibrous vegetables like broccoli, kale, stuff like that. That would probably be an ideal dietary pattern for somebody who's very insulin insensitive, who might have diabetes, can't really control their blood sugar well, and doesn't want to be on a ton of medications like, inject insulin constantly.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'd say largely speaking, if it's whole food of any kind, it's probably better. I think the problem I have with contention is when protein's too low. So I'm much bigger on getting the protein right. Greek keto, protein means the first.
Ja, dann nimmst du einen Proteinshake. Wenn das nicht reicht, nimmst du 2 Proteinshakes. So ist das Problem. 40 Gramm Proteinpulver, hast 30 Gramm Protein. Zwischen den Mahlzeiten dieses extra Protein, 30 Gramm reines Protein. Ja, reicht nicht aus. Machst du noch einen Shake vorm Schlafengehen. Hast du 60 Gramm reines Protein neben allen Mahlzeiten zu dir genommen. Das wird ja wohl ausreichen. Wenn du in die Wissenschaft guckst, reicht es aus.
So my practical case is 30%, by caloric value for what it's worth, should be protein. But do you see people in your vegan plant-based sort of arena or space where if their protein's too low, they end up overeating to compensate because they don't quite get those rich amino acid spectrums, B vitamins, perhaps things like that? Do you see people, 10% protein not in their diet and they're just not becoming well?
Usually people who are eating like that are just very skinny.
Ja, Frutarier.
I've never really seen any vegans that are overweight or like skinny fat who eat like that. They're usually like cyclists, and they're just very lean and skinny. There is good evidence that eating protein up to a point helps to lower appetite. So if you're consuming too low protein, that can cause you to overeat other macronutrients. But once you meet your protein requirements, any additional protein doesn't seem to have any benefit.
Ja, also ich kann auch von mir aus sagen, dass Protein mir auch hilft, länger satt zu bleiben auf jeden Fall.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm familiar with that research as well. I use the same practice for my dietary approach for competitions. Protein just goes way up, and it's hard to overeat. I don't go to bed hungry, so we can agree on that for sure. We definitely have a protein requirement, whether that be from plant-based or animal foods. I wanted to touch on something as well, just because we're a bit limited for time. I want to get through as much as possible. Then, obviously, the audience
we should
is
talk about
free
some
to
heart
have.
disease, because that was a big component. So again, LDL is a causal factor in heart disease. I know in the carnivore community, a lot of people try to deny that, but you should not deny science. It is just a reality. There's going to be benefits and downsides to any diet, and one big downside to a carnivore diet is going to be your LDL. I'm sure you've seen personally people with very high LDL scores, relative to, the national average. I'm sure you see a lot of people over like 200 on their LDL score. So the reason we know LDL is causative when it comes to heart disease is because all methods of LDL lowering are associated with lower heart disease risk. And the extent to which any treatment is efficacious in lowering heart disease risk depends on the extent to which it lowers LDL. So, and that includes Mendelian randomization studies. So basically, let me find the paper here.
Der zitiert genau das Paper, was ich immer zitiere.
You're mentioning all these things like Mendelian randomization, the Adventist Health Study, the EPIC study, the Nurses Study. And I'm not the best at explaining things because certain diseases and mental stuff I have, but I can kind of picture it. But what I'm trying to say is, have you looked at the debunking video? So, like Game Changers debunked, Nurses Health Study debunked, Adventist, or was it the 7-county, whatever it was, study, you know?
I'm not particularly familiar with them. Are you seeing my screen?
Not at the moment,
It's not
no.
showing up.
I need to chuck it up.
Oh,
Oh,
here
yeah,
we go.
sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so low-density lipoproteins cause atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, evidence from genetic, epidemiological, and clinical studies, consensus statement.
Gestern oder so hat jemand nach LDL gefragt. Ich habe ihm genau das Paper reingesendet. Weil es das beste Paper ist.
From the European Atherosclerosis Society. So basically, what Mendelian randomization studies are is they look at certain genetic phenotypes. There are certain genes that lower your cholesterol. So it's not from any kind of certain diet you're on or lifestyle. You just have lower cholesterol because of your genes. And in fact, most of your serum cholesterol score is dependent on your genes. So people who have those genes have lower risk of heart disease. And if you look at figure 2, Mendelian
Das ist die beste Grafik zu dem Thema.
randomization studies, they actually show the most significance when it comes to changes in LDL and risk of heart disease. So, and this is like, again, this is across all methods of LDL lowering. So you're talking about statin trials, PCSK9 inhibitors, dietary interventions. You also have prospective cohort data in here as well. And like I mentioned, Mendelian randomization. Across all methods of LDL lowering, LDL is always predictive in heart disease risk. And the efficacy of any heart disease treatment is predicated based on its degree of LDL lowering.
Wir sehen alle einen linearen Zusammenhang.
On top of that,
Log-linear.
you should also look at this. So normal LDL cholesterol levels are associated with subclinical
Also die Skala ist logarithmiert und nicht arithmetisch.
atherosclerosis in the absence of risk factors. So what they did in this paper is they looked at participants who
Ja, das Paper kenne ich auch.
had no family history of heart disease, normal weight, no smoking, didn't have hypercholesterolemia, so very healthy subjects, like no type 2 diabetes. And what they found was the higher their LDL, the higher the likelihood of them developing atherosclerosis. And keep in mind, this is in a very low-risk population. So once you got to about over 150 milligrams per deciliter of LDL,
Da habe ich mich erschrocken, ey. Vielen Dank für das Sub-Zuckerinsel an Jonas. Dankeschön für den Vegan Support.
about 60 or a little over 60% of subjects had atherosclerosis. About half of them had atherosclerosis in multiple sites, and about 10-15% of them had atherosclerosis in just systemically over their body. So when you see stuff like this, I don't know, like, if you're going to deny there's a causal link between LDL and heart disease, you're just denying the data. It's just a simple fact. If you want to go on the carnivore diet because you feel better on it, you have more energy, or it's treating some autoimmune issue, like you have eczema and it's super annoying, and the only diet you found so far is the carnivore diet to get rid of your eczema, whatever, you're going to have to acknowledge there are downsides like this. You are going to have higher LDL on a carnivore diet because you're eating way more saturated fat and cholesterol. You're also not consuming any fiber, and this is going to be something you have to worry about later down the road. And again, we looked at the only study looking at a carnivore diet, and you saw increases in their CAC score over the course of only a few months.
Okay, so my argument towards the LDL thing is that there's a few things. So why would our body produce something that was harmful to it?
Oh mein Gott. Der gleiche Blödsinn wie im deutschsprachigen Bereich. Immer derselbe Müll. Warum produziert der Körper dann Cholesterin, wenn es doch schädlich ist? Um Gottes Willen.
And surely LDL is just a artifact number that we find in the blood because of something else is happening. And the third point I'd make is that if we're looking at clogged up arteries in biopsies, autopsies, whatever, we're often seeing that it's not actually a large
Kerl.
Mal sowas von.
amount of cholesterol in the blood, in the arteries actually forming. It's mostly foam cells. So how can we say one LDL is causing that proliferation of the endothelial cell lining, or cholesterol? Because cholesterol is a repair molecule. Our body's obviously obviously makes it for a reason. Otherwise, we wouldn't need it. You know, our body produces something, I don't know exactly, maybe 400 milligrams per day.
Und weil der Körper LDL braucht, weil der Körper Cholesterin braucht und Cholesterin was repariert. Deswegen ist es gut, Cholesterin zu essen. Hatte diese wirklich Level 0 Steinzeit-Denkweise. Oh mein Gott.
So why is our body doing something like that if it's bad for us?
Warum glaubst du nicht das, was mendelische Randomisierungsstudien rausgefunden haben oder andere Gigapaper zu diesem Thema? Warum glaubst du nicht eher das als dein unfassbar dämliche möchte gern nicht Fallacy sein, Fallacy. Das eine folgt doch auf das andere, oder nicht? Wenn das repariert, dann muss das doch gut sein. Oh mein Gott.
Yeah, so few things to note here. There's a thing called antagonistic pleiotropy. So
Oh, jetzt wird's deep.
things that are beneficial for survival early in life are not necessarily beneficial for survival later in life. There may be certain benefits to having higher cholesterol levels earlier on in life, and later in life, it's bad for you. It causes heart disease. So there's some really interesting research on a disease called Smith-Lemli-Opitz. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It used to be characterized as a disease caused by cholesterol deficiency. Now it's actually characterized as a disease. It's categorized as a disease of elevated sterol levels. So it causes very low cholesterol levels in the body, and sometimes it causes like zero, and you never get born. So if you're a fetus and you don't produce cholesterol, you just end up dying. There's actually a theory that it's responsible.
Siehst du, wenn du einen Cholesterinspiegel von 0 hast, stirbst du. Also du wirst gar nicht geboren. Deswegen muss man den ganzen Tag Cholesterin essen. Cholesterin essen. Das ist, oh mein Gott. Das ist wie diese Leute, wie die das wirklich sogar in Debatten sagen. Die sagen, Fleisch ist gut, weil wir haben Fleisch in uns. Also wir sollten das essen, was wir in uns haben. Ja, du isst auch Knochen, oder? Knochen haben wir in uns. Oh mein Gott. Es ist alles so schlecht. Es ist alles so low. Oh mein Gott.
Responsible for a lot of miscarriages. So people with
Hast neue Hülle gekauft. Cool.
Smith-Lemli-Opitz, they have very low cholesterol because they lack.
Ja, Madev wieder mit einem super Beispiel. Ja, Sonne ist gut. Ja, bildet Vitamin D. Deswegen nach Spanien ziehen und nur noch in der Sonne liegen nackt. Also du verbrennst jeden Tag zur Hölle, ne? Und nach einem Jahr hast du Hautkrebs und verreckst. So. Ist unglaublich. Diese Denkweise.
The enzyme 7-dehydrocholesterol reductase. And in order to get Smith-Lemli-Opitz, you need parents that give both phenotypes to you. So you have two alleles. So if you only have one allele, you're fine. If you have both alleles, you get Smith-Lemli-Opitz. Now, the benefit to having one of those alleles appears to be if you have less 7-dehydrocholesterol reductase, that means you have more 7-dehydrocholesterol in your serum. If you have more 7-dehydrocholesterol in your serum, that means you can produce more vitamin D, because that's how vitamin D is produced. It's produced by getting 7-dehydrocholesterol and exposing it to UV light. So that's probably why you see a higher frequency of these alleles in white European populations. But if you have both alleles, you end up getting this really bad disease that causes cognitive defects, mental retardation, physical weakness. But a lot of these effects are actually assumed to be due to elevated 7-dehydrocholesterol levels. They can be thousands of times higher than are normal, and they can have neurodegenerative effects. So, point I'm making with all of this is there may be certain populations that, for whatever reason, benefit from higher cholesterol levels. It may have something to do with vitamin D production, might have something to do with production of certain hormones. Obviously, certain populations benefit from not producing as much cholesterol and producing some more of these sterols because of vitamin D. So just because something is necessary and we produce it and it's required for life doesn't mean long term super elevated levels of these things are good for you. So,
No shit, wow, wer hätte das gedacht?
again, the argument that, okay, well, we produce cholesterol, why would your body make something that's bad for you? Well, again, antagonistic pleiotropy might be beneficial for survival early in life, might be really bad for survival later in life. You're also not
Ja, ich meine, du kannst das so kompliziert erklären, du kannst aber auch einfach dem Menschen erklären, warum das ein Non Sequitur ist. Das folgt einfach nicht. Muss man es wirklich erklären? Wenn dein Körper das produziert, heißt das nicht, dass du das fressen sollst und das immer weiter anheben sollst. Wie folgt das? Was kalkulierst du da in deinem Kopf?
exposed to the same kind of environmental risks that your ancestors were. So elevated cholesterol may be really good if you're getting parasitic infections or certain communicable diseases. That might protect you against some of those things. You don't have to really worry about that so much
Das Ding
anymore.
ist, also ich gebe der militanten Veganerin ja wirklich in 100% ihrer Punkte recht. Ja, also es ist ja wirklich einfach so. Mit allem, was sie sagt, hat sie zu 100% recht. Ja, wie wir mit den Tieren umgehen, geht gar nicht. Die leiden, Kühe werden vergenusswurzelt, damit wir Milch haben. Die leiden, werden umgebracht und so weiter. Und ich sag mal, die werden ja auch gehalten wie ein Stück Scheiße, ist ja nun mal einfach so. Und das geht an sich natürlich gar nicht fit. Absolut, Digga. Zu 100% alles, was die Militante sagt im Thema, hat sie komplett recht. Es gibt keinen Grund, Fleisch zu essen.
Ihr habt's gehört. Was ist der Eigenschaftsunterschied? Schmeckt gut. Darf man Menschen essen, die schmecken? Nein. Widerspruch. Aber das Gesetz. Appeal to law fallacy. Du bist dumm. Ad hominem. Du benutzt auch ein Handy. Tu coque fallacy. Ihr tötet auch Insekten. Selbstmord reductio. Ach, lass mich doch in Ruhe. Ja, vielen Dank. Das war eine ziemlich gute Beschreibung von allem, was ich bis jetzt erzählt habe. Vielen Dank für den Mega-Support, Zuckerinsel.
So again,
Ach, leck mich doch. Ja.
why would you assume elevated cholesterol is fine when, again, clearly the data suggests otherwise?
Genau, warum juckt dich irgendein Slippery Slope, den du im Kopf machst, Cholesterin wird produziert, deswegen ist es gut, deswegen immer weiter ansteigen, anstatt auf die Wissenschaft zu hören. Why? Oh mein Gott, erwachsene Menschen, ne?
Secondly, when you talked about the
Wie im Kindergarten, ehrlich.
foam cell thing, when you do these dissections on cadavers, you see most
Oh, der Körper produziert irgendein Amount an Cyanid. Ja, Cyanid fressen, fällst du tot um. Wundervoll. Super Logik.
foam cells. That's just part of atherosclerotic pathology. So LDL permeates your arterial wall. LDL embeds inside the arterial wall. It ends up oxidizing. Foam cells end up going to that area to attack it because it senses this inflammation there. And then
Die Foam Cells, die fressen das auf.
foam cells expand, and that leads
Deswegen werden die auch größer, weil die das LDL-Cholesterin dort auffressen.
to atherosclerosis. But LDL is
Deswegen kriegst du im Gefäß eine Beule, weil die Foam Cells aufquellen, dadurch, dass sie das Cholesterin auffressen.
the cause for all that.
Okay, so let's say hypothetically that you have a diet high in cholesterol, high in saturated fat, clogs up your arteries through the foam cells from the explanation you gave. Say that's what happens. So
Say that what's happened. Wir haben Wissenschaft dazu. Wovon redest du? Wer denied, dass das so funktioniert?
my argument would be,
Du oder was?
I just thought of it. My brain's gone dead. Sorry, guys.
Alright. Weiß jemand, warum der Typ solche Denkprobleme hat? Weil ich weiß es. Kohlenhydrate. Dein Hirn läuft auf Glucose.
I don't have an argument with that. Apologies, my brain is absolutely dead.
Okay.
Were you going to talk about LDL being a help
Gleich hat er's.
here, repairing? You mentioned something like that before.
Oh, that was it. Yeah, cheers. Yeah, so
Und der Veganer, der sich jeden Tag hunderte Gramm Kohlenhydrate reinballert, der kann sich komischerweise daran erinnern, was der Typ eigentlich sagen will. Bang, boom, pow.
yeah, what it was is, okay, fine. Let's assume that the cholesterol is clogging up our arteries with the help of LDL, creating foam cells, things like that. is it perhaps possible that the body is doing that deliberately to protect itself from some other more harmful damage? Do you get what I'm saying? I'm kind of like bringing up the kind of the natural argument. Like, is the body trying to, for example, like children are born with one leg. Well, is them being born with one leg a better opportunity for them in life than what the other thing was that would have caused worse physical deformity to them?
Yeah, so I haven't really seen any evidence that LDL is any kind of help when it comes to, building up plaque or repairing
Okay, das mit dem Einbeinigen habe ich gerade nicht verstanden.
endothelial
Weil ich habe einfach, glaube ich, nicht verstanden, was er gesagt hat.
cell damage. In fact, it seems to do the opposite. Usually, elevated LDL is associated with more endothelial cell damage. So, I just haven't seen any good evidence for that hypothesis. And again, we know if you have elevated LDL, you have a much higher risk of developing atherosclerosis. So, could be the case. I haven't seen any evidence for it. I don't know why you'd necessarily assume LDL is working as kind of like a repairman for your arterial walls. Even if that were the case, we can look at the outcome data. People with lower LDL have better outcomes. They have
Genau, Outcome Data ist immer das Nonplusultra. Ist völlig egal, du kannst jetzt zusammen fantasieren, was du willst. LDL ist gut, LDL verhindert Entzündungen oder muss in der Gefäßwand sein oder sowas. Alles völlig egal. Du gehst in die Wissenschaft, guckst dir die höchste Evidenz an, die wir haben. Randomisierte Mandalorian Studies halt und guckst dir an, also Genetikstudien und alle anderen Studien, PSK9 und wie die alle heißen, und siehst log-linearen Zusammenhang und dann siehst du die Outcomes, wie es am Ende auch rauskommt. Da brauchst du nicht zusammen zu fantasieren, es steht schwarz auf weiß da, was passiert. Das passiert, wenn du PSK9-Inhibitor nimmst, das passiert, wenn du LDL absenkst, das passiert mit Mendelian Randomization Studies, also Genetik. Wenn die Genetik so ist, dass du krankhaft erniedrigte Spiegel hast, hast du komischerweise mega niedrige Wahrscheinlichkeit für Herz-Kreislauf-Erkrankungen, völlig egal, was du an Cholesterin frisst. Und vice versa. Also, warum sich etwas zusammen fantasieren? Warum nicht in die Evidenz gucken? Hat sich das jemand ausgedacht? Hat sich jemand den Mendelian-Studien ausgedacht?
have lower rates of heart disease, lower rates of heart attacks, lower risk of all-cause mortality with lower.
Ja, und das Made schreibt das so richtig, es scheitert so und so alles an der Moral. Also alles völlig egal, was du da zusammen fantasierst. Wenn du sagst, man darf Tiere essen, weil es gesünder ist, darf man Menschen essen, weil es gesünder ist. Bumm, zack, bist du weg vom Fenster. Es sei denn natürlich, du gehst das Reductio ein. Ich habe keine weiteren Fragen. I rest my case here.
Lower LDL. So I would just say lower your LDL. And
Sure.
best way to do that is to lower saturated fat. Increasing fiber consumption also lowers your LDL.
Ich überlege wirklich, ob wir morgen vielleicht das Nico Rittenau-Ding gucken. Es gibt ein mega Debunk-Video. Wahrscheinlich gucken wir das morgen sogar zusammen. Ein sehr langes Video.
A healthy body weight, exercise,
Brandneu.
that all lowers your LDL. Some people won't be able to lower their LDL enough to really prevent the risk of heart disease. So for primary intervention, so before you get your first heart attack or, develop, clinical atherosclerosis, you want to try to keep your LDL below 70. That seems to be the best case situation. So not everybody can get that low. Some people have familial hypercholesterolemia, and some people are really fucked. They have they're homozygous for familial hypercholesterolemia. You absolutely need to go on cholesterol-lowering medications, so talk to your doctor. For secondary prevention, so if you already have clinical atherosclerosis or you've already suffered a heart attack, you need to get your LDL very low. Ideally, you want to get it below 35. That's where your risk of another heart attack approaches zero. So you want to have your LDL low. And again, a carnivore diet is very, very counterintuitive for heart disease prevention.
Ja, das ist das Dümmste, was du machen kannst. Nicht nur ernährungstechnisch, sondern auch ethisch. Du kannst diese Position ja nicht verteidigen. Try it. Try. Komm auf meinen Server und versuch es.
Okay. Most of my information I've got is based on anecdotes, obviously, which is not a high level of informative or data you can really draw from.
Jawohl, das ist die sehr niedrige Evidenz, was du da bringst. Anecdotes, ja. Deine ganzen Carnivore-Freunde, die haben der eine, bei dem einen ist Krebs weggegangen, bei dem anderen Alzheimer, bei dem anderen alle Autoimmunerkrankungen, klar. Klar, natürlich. Wir kennen alle die Anekdoten, von denen uns die Carnis alle erzählen.
I would personally,
Gut, dass keiner von euch Studien dazu hat.
I'm going to struggle to contend with what you
Gut, dass wir Studien zu Veganismus haben.
said earlier about LDL and its impact on endothelial function. That's not something I'm looked at, so I'm not in a position to sort of say this is what I think. So I'll give you that one for the sake of the matter. I don't know enough about it personally, so I couldn't argue that point. Was there any other points you wanted to make? I know you said about folate, vitamin C. Was there anything else?
Yeah, so any kind of dietary pattern is going to be associated with higher risk of certain vitamin or mineral deficiencies. For vegan diets, assuming you're supplementing with B12, and right now most people are supplementing with B12, vegans seem to be, on average, at higher risk of deficiency in iodine and zinc. Meat eaters seem to have higher rates of folate and vitamin C deficiencies. So if we look at the carnivore dietary pattern, again, I've seen some carnivore blood work. I've seen people with very, very low folate levels. And of course, if you're not eating any fruits or vegetables, your vitamin C levels are also going to be very low. Skeletal muscle tissue does have some vitamin C, not very much. If you're a sort of
100%, 150% Folsäure, cool. Echt cool,
normal active person, probably need around 22 to 2,500 calories per day. For your average person who gets a little bit of exercise, you're going to struggle to get the 10 milligrams required just to prevent scurvy. The recommended daily intake is at least 45 milligrams per day. Usually it's recommended to get around 70. So if you only manage to get around 10 milligrams, you are at risk of scurvy. Certain people need more vitamin C, especially if you're a smoker. You need way more vitamin C.
Pass auf, dass du keinen Vitamin C-Mangel bekommst, Carnivore. Vitamin C-Mangel, Alter. Das musst du auch erstmal hinkriegen.
C. If you're physically active, if you, like, there's metabolic differences between individuals. So I have anecdotally seen some people report getting scurvy. They haven't outright said they got scurvy, but they were getting bleeding gums, their tooth.
Trap lips, gums.
So they were getting scurvy, and then they went off the diet. I've also seen some people anecdotally report their vitamin C levels were like very, very low, well below what would be considered a deficiency. So that's definitely a concern. I think the reason you see some people like Sean Bates
150% Vitamin C. 150% Vitamin B12. Let's go.
and definitely Ken Berry.
Shit, Alter.
That guy is completely full of shit. They say, oh, you don't need vitamin C.
Kann man sich gar nicht vorstellen, ne? Schmeißt dir so eine Pille rein, alle Probleme gelöst.
You get it enough from meat. Well, Ken Berry goes out to eat with
Aber es heißt Chemie, das kann man ja nicht machen. Ist ja Appeal to Nature, Mann. Wer isst schon Chemie?
his wife all the fucking time. She vlogs it, and you see him eating fruits and vegetables. So
That's a fair point.
Lieber Karnivor Diet machen ist natürlich. Natürlich.
So
Yeah.
talk shit all you want, but
Yeah.
you're not.
That is a
proving
fair
anything.
point. I would agree there, Richard. There are very few pure carnivore people out there that just eat meat, eggs, fish, dairy, stuff like that. Very few. And I would agree, largely speaking, if we look at the nutritional analysis of the average person on a carnivore diet, you would see vitamin C being low on the reference range and see folate being low on the reference range, perhaps vitamin E as well. Which is why, in my opinion, I'm more of a fan of a mixed animal food diet containing the foods I just mentioned. The problem I have with that is, which is
Rechtfertige mal Tiermord.
perhaps slightly similar to the problem you might have with your diet. So you might be aware of the study that they've performed where they had, I believe it's a corn tortilla wrap or something, like a flatbread sort of thing. They had some, I believe it was beef or oysters or something, and they basically added in plant ingredients to this meal, and they found that the zinc levels were actually reduced from the meal. So you actually had more zinc in a diet with just beef versus beef, oyster, and black beans, I think it was. So there's obviously some kind of negative collation going on. Now, that's the vegan diet limitation that I have, so that's something I'd be concerned about, the negative collation from the anti-nutrients. With the carnivore diet, yeah, we do see it being hard to get a significant portion of our diet with enough vitamin C in it. And you're correct, I'd agree, yes, there's not a lot in muscle meat. We're talking 1 to 2 milligrams per pound of ground beef, 2 to 4 milligrams per pound of farmed salmon, for example. If you eat liver, you're probably fine. Most people don't. So that's why I'm more of a fan of eating a broad amount of animal foods. And personally, I do see people falling off the lion diet, which is, ruminant meat only, very quickly. So that tells me maybe the lion diet isn't
Lion Diet, ja. Der nächste unfassbare Unfall. Ich würde solche Begriffe benutzen. Ja, machen wir einfach weiter.
optimal for most people in the animal-based spectrum. But I'd say, myself, I don't supplement with vitamin C. I don't drink orange juice or anything like that.
Bist du aus dem Pandaschlaf?
Lemon juice. I've been carnivore now for 4.5 years. I've probably had fruit
Vielleicht ist er auf Energy.
a handful of times
Zuckerinsel trinkst du eigentlich Energy?
in that period of time. And if you're saying we need, I think you said 8 or 10 milligrams per day at the bare minimum, with the recommendation being, or the idea being 40 or 45 milligrams. I've had way less than that. I would have had about, over the span of 4.5 years, something like 3 milligrams probably, if I had to guess. I don't have scurvy. I don't have any vitamin deficiencies in my blood
I
test
would
either.
really question that because some of the early research on scurvy, they can't do it anymore. It's unethical. You can't induce scurvy in people. They found the cutoff point that would make sure somebody doesn't start actually getting scurvy, like the bleeding gums and everything, was around 10 milligrams. Below that, risk really, really increases. And even around 10 milligrams, they still had really poor wound healing. So they would actually make incisions into the skin and then see the integrity of the scars, and they wouldn't be able to form scars properly. So I really, really doubt you're actually getting 3. You're probably getting more than you think. And I would suspect if you're taking, there's weird places where vitamin C hides. A lot of people think, we'll cheat on the carnivore diet and eat a couple potatoes, and they're like, oh, it's just a few potatoes. Potatoes are extremely high in vitamin C. They're one of the highest vitamin C foods there are. A lot of people don't know that. If you put any kind of spices on any of your foods, like paprika is
Ja, ich weiß nicht. Also Kartoffeln, eine der höchsten Vitamin C-Quellen, aber die werden ja erhitzt. Da geht das Vitamin C, einiges von Vitamin C verloren. Also ist das Vitamin C immer noch, ist die Kartoffel immer noch Top-Vitamin C-Lieferant, nachdem es gekocht wurde? Wäre meine Frage.
extremely high in vitamin C.
Fault hier auf Energy, ja. Ja, ich hatte heute noch keinen Energy. Aber heute auch keine Lust. Morgen wahrscheinlich oder so.
If you're taking some herbal supplements,
Aber ich habe eine Dose im Kühlschrank stehen, ja.
some people will take ashwagandha, but it will have a bunch of other things like antioxidants and some minerals. Well, they'll include vitamin C in the thing. So a lot of these people who say, "Oh, I only get 2-3 milligrams vitamin C," I don't buy it. Based on all the research I've seen, seems extremely, extremely implausible. And even if you could get away with it, I don't know why you do it. Vitamin C is good for you. It's extremely important for protecting your brain. You're going to really increase the risk of neurodegenerative diseases later in life. Your brain's just going to age faster. It's very important for recovery, wound healing, especially if you're doing weight training or anything physically active or dangerous. You need to be able to heal and recover. So vitamin C is super important. I don't know why you wouldn't just take a supplement at the very least.
I understand the value of covering bases if someone was concerned, but if I'm honest, honestly myself, I'm not concerned because there's more than one antioxidant. There's astaxanthin, which I get from fish, for example, which is something of magnitude of I believe something like 30 times more potent.
Well, some
than
of these
vitamin C.
some of these antioxidants don't go to the same areas. So in your brain specifically, vitamin C is the most important antioxidant.
Cholesterol?
What do you mean?
Dietary cholesterol is an antioxidant for the brain. One of them.
You sure about that? I've never heard about that.
Right.
Are
Someone
you sure
will
it's
comment
not
below and
uric
see if I'm
acid?
talking crap. Uric acid's another one, but yeah, they're all along the same spectrum of antioxidants. Yeah.
I don't think cholesterol works as an antioxidant, but vitamin C, very important antioxidant for the brain.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you heard the arguments, you probably have because you're a well-researched guy, which is why I was looking forward to this. The arguments about the GLUT4 transporter, vitamin C, carbohydrate uptake, all that sort of stuff. How would you challenge that argument?
Sorry, what's the argument?
So the idea is that the GLUT4 transporter in muscle cells, for example, will have a cross-inhibition effect with vitamin C intake. Meaning,
Oh, you mean
if-
glucose inhibits.
so if there's
vitamin
less
C.
glucose in
Okay.
my diet,
Yeah, I've heard that.
vitamin C is freed up. Yeah.
Okay. So there's an important thing to note here. Just because something inhibits absorption immediately, so if you give somebody glucose with vitamin C, you see glucose inhibiting vitamin C absorption in the enterocyte, that doesn't mean you're not going to absorb all of that vitamin C. It just means you're getting initial inhibition. So yeah, absorption in the first like hour or two is going to be lower. You're still going to absorb all that vitamin C. So just because it slows it down, that doesn't mean you need less vitamin C because you're on a carnivore diet because you're consuming less glucose. That's a misunderstanding that a lot of people make. Another misunderstanding, it's with regards to a different nutrient, is vitamin A. So a lot of carnivore dieters will say you can't get enough vitamin A on a vegan diet because you have to rely on conversion of provitamin A carotenoids into vitamin A, and some people have lower rates of conversion. Yes, they have lower rates of conversion, but that doesn't mean they have lower amounts of conversion. So they are going to convert the same amount of provitamin A carotenoids into vitamin A. It just happens slower. So if they happen to have a deficiency, if they're just eating sweet potatoes, it's going to take longer for them to get rid of that deficiency. But there's no association between these genes that affect vitamin A conversion rates and vitamin A deficiency. Low converters, high converters, same rates of vitamin A deficiency, because they're both converting the same amount of vitamin A. It's just happening at different rates.
Oh, it's an interesting argument. I've never had that one been said before, so it's quite interesting though. So what are the other points? We've covered cholesterol, saturated fat.
You mentioned
vitamins, minerals.
Yeah, so you mentioned like zinc and mineral deficiency in a vegan diet and issues with absorption. So there's a few things.
Yeah, mainly the chelation side of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a few things to point out. One thing, we don't technically know what constitutes a zinc deficiency. We're really just going by average serum levels. So vegans might have lower levels, but might not necessarily mean zinc deficiency. Since that's the only evidence we have to go on, we can just argue, yeah, vegans have higher rates of deficiency. That may have more to do with just low zinc intake, as opposed to issues with zinc absorption. There's a lot of mixed research on zinc absorption. Some studies show there's not really much difference. Some studies show significant difference, especially in children with like malnutrition, and they have some GI problems from like an infection. So it may be highly individual. There may be some very big inter-individual differences. The types of food that you consume and mixes of food also highly affect zinc absorption. So if you're eating high zinc foods like lentils are pretty high in zinc. If you just eat lentils alone, zinc absorption might not be that great, but if you include onions and garlic, that improves zinc absorption pretty substantially. And it seems to increase it roughly to around the rates of absorption you'd get from eating like a steak. So again, dietary planning plays a role here. Just make sure you're eating enough in your diet. Maybe make some smart choices where you include some other foods along with, some of the high zinc sources you're eating. And there's nothing wrong with supplementing. Every society is going to have certain risks of vitamin or mineral deficiencies. There's people who are eating like just rice. We see them get vitamin A deficiencies constantly. They need to supplement vitamin A. Over here in North America, vitamin D deficiencies are rampant as hell. And the only way I can really realistically see dealing with that is with supplementation. There's not many foods that are particularly high in vitamin D. Unless you're willing to eat like a lot of fish every single day, you're probably going to have issues getting enough vitamin D and you need to supplement. So whatever diet you're on, there's going to be some nutrients that are a bit easier to get, a bit harder to get, and just make some smart choices with supplementation. Use a tracking app like Chronometer, and every so often get blood work to see if you're deficient in anything. Then you can make some changes.
Sure. Would you say that it's a fair argument that a vegan diet would contain, or is likely to contain, more deficiencies than a carnivore diet or a mixed animal food diet? Because we also about carnosine, taurine, tyrosine.
Well, none of those
creatine,
are
B12,
essential amino
D3.
acids. There's benefits.
You can convert them, I guess. Yeah.
So there's benefits to supplementing things like taurine, but all the research on these amino acids, they're on supplements. So if you want to get benefits with like fat oxidation, energy production, body composition changes, stuff like that, it's on a vegan supplement anyway. So if you want to get some of those benefits, just take a supplement. That's what all the research is on. Creatine's good. I supplement with creatine. You know, again, realistically, to get an efficacious dose, especially if you're a larger person, you're going to have to take a supplement anyway. But I wouldn't say, on average, your typical carnivore dieter is probably going to suffer nutritional deficiencies at a lower rate than a vegan dieter. And I have my cat here jumping on my
I
desk.
saw her in the background earlier. Hello.
It's a good kitty.
Don't worry, I don't eat pets. Don't worry.
Yeah, this is a vegan cat.
Yeah.
Feed all my cats, all my animals vegan diet.
Do you give them supplemental taurine as well?
Well, the taurine's in the cat food.
Feed.
It's added.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay, that's right.
Yeah, so they get all the.
Yeah, I was going to say I was
nutrition
getting edgy then. I was like, oh my god.
they need. Yeah, I make sure my kitties are healthy. Gee, it's a big,
That's good
strong
to
kitty. Oh my
Nice
god,
one.
you're
yeah,
like
I've got a dog myself. He eats animals, and if I let him loose, he'll eat a swan that's in. Well, he'll try and eat a swan that's in the river nearby.
That's
He's
that's
ferocious. He's ferocious. Over here, it's very illegal because it's like the queen's
Yeah.
animal sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's like the worst thing you can do.
Well,
Probably.
same here. Swans and geese are protected animals, so you can get a huge fine. Even if you run over a goose, you can get a $15,000 fine.
Oh, that's quite interesting. If we covered everything you wanted to cover, I mean, I thought it was quite fruitful. You gave me some things which I didn't know about before, things which I've never obviously looked at. The question is probably, am I going to change my diet? No, personally, just because of how I subjectively
Here we go.
feel. The blood markers that I do have now versus what I had on a mixed macronutrient carboholic processed food diet or worse. Unlike meat, it's my inhibition to eat meat. So it's human nature, I guess, in that sense. That's my natural instinctive approach. But I do respect people that do something different to me.
Yeah.
Natural instinct. Here we go.
So I would
Erwachsener Mann.
say, just because you feel good doing something, that doesn't mean what you're doing is overall good. There are people who habitually take crystal meth, heroin. They're able to hold down a job. They get to party, have fun. They feel better. It makes them feel productive throughout the day. Well, they're also probably going to die younger and have like organ failure, and their teeth are going to rot out, or something bad's going to happen. So you can get or feel or have perceived benefits doing something that isn't overall good for you. I think it's pretty clear based on the data. Carnivore dietary pattern is just worse for you. You have higher risk of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and earlier mortality. Especially if you have elevated serum cholesterol. Again, that's the principal risk factor for heart disease. So, when you're young, you can eat a pretty bad diet, have very high cholesterol, not really notice it. But, by the time you're 40, 50, 60, that's going to catch up to you. You're going to end up getting angina, heart problems. You're going to have trouble walking up the stairs. And then you're probably not going to feel like the carnivore diet's working out so well for you. And we didn't talk about it in this debate, but I did want to debate ethics. And, if we care about animals, like, we're not infinitely valuable. We're not the only
Oh, die machen jetzt die Ethikdebatte noch? Oh mein Gott.
people that, matter here. I don't think you or anyone in your audience would want to see animals getting injured. You care for your dog. I care for my dogs and cats and rabbits and everything.
Na, dann zeig mal, was du kannst, Carnivore Muscle.
It's really sad to see these animals be mistreated and killed.
Agreed,
So
yeah.
I
Du wirst bestimmt den 200 IQ-Trait nennen. Ich sehe es schon kommen. Ich zitter schon ein bisschen, um ehrlich zu sein.
think when we're making dietary choices, that absolutely has to be a consideration. And if we care about animals and we care about our own health, the only logical conclusion there to me seems to be a vegan diet and lifestyle, where you're making food choices that are not only beneficial for yourself, but they're also beneficial for the creatures you care about. Like, why would you be okay with a cow, a chicken, a pig getting its throat slit open when you would never allow that to happen to your dog or cat?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to debate the ethical argument at all because I've seen it happen online many times.
Ah, der dodgt die Debatte. Here we go. Because I have seen it happen online many times.
Not just with you, but other people. And we end up going around in circles. We just throw information out there. All I'd say is I have suffered a lot from different health issues over my life, a tremendous amount I'm 29 years old. I look about 40 odd. You can see in my face, my body is damaged. That's from all the bad decisions I made when I was younger. But basically, the way I choose to live is put myself and my family, friends, loved ones in the first priority, and everything else in the second priority. That's just the way I live. No one has to agree with me on that if they're on the vegan side of the fence. Maybe I'm a bad person for it, but I go to sleep at night with a clear conscience. The animals that I do eat are largely speaking from a farm, which is about a 5-minute walk down.
Here we go. Natürlich. Wie jeder Omni ever.
The road from me. Good quad.
Noch nie hat ein Mensch ein Tierprodukt gekauft aus Massentierhaltung.
Good standards, good welfare. I know the owners. I don't buy all my meat from there, admittedly, but I do buy a large proportion of it.
Ach was.
I feel good at night knowing I do that versus the alternative, which is buy
I feel good at night, ja, sicher.
slaughterhouse crap, which is basically fed a bad diet, not put in a nice, appropriate way to live. So I'm all for, the welfare of animals and harm reduction for sure. Then one argument I'd make, the only argument I'm going to make in my last word is to say something about the 4 quadrillion animals of different kinds that are killed each year in plant-based agriculture, which is an interesting statistic. And I think it's loosely defined. I think it's not that accurate, but when someone says to me 4 quadrillion, I think that's a big number.
Ja, ich würde an dem ganz schnell die Redaktors laufen lassen. Der hat ja Haus der NTT gestartet. Einmal kurz fragen, okay, dann wäre es also auch okay für deine Gesundheit, dass auch Haustiere gefarmt werden, wenn es genauso helfen würde. Und dann sagt er ja und dann machst du das mit Menschen, dann sagt er ja und dann ist alles da, was man wissen muss.
Maybe it's possible that there's bad sides to every spectrum of different diets.
Well,
I don't know.
we had a good conversation here. I think we were both respectful to each other, and you seem fairly open-minded. Why don't we have a ethics debate again later?
I won't do an ethics debate, and it's not you
Well, how
personally. I won't do an ethics because I'm very firm with my beliefs, and I've had this debate about 10 times before, and I end up in the same conclusion. But basically, it just contrasts our opinions. You think this, I think
Nenn einfach den Trade, anstatt rumzurambeln. Großer Mann, was ist los?
that, and we end up in the same spot.
Keine Lust. Und der hat auch schon vorher gesagt, er macht die Debatten nicht, da werden einfach nur Informationen ausgetauscht. Also der hat gar nicht verstanden, was in einer veganen Debatte gemacht wird. Es wird deine Prop gepresst, nichts anderes.
And it's not
Da werden keine Informationen ausgetauscht.
fruitful to anyone because it's something I live with. It's not like a
Aber so wie ich den jetzt nach dem, was er gesagt hat, einschätze, denke ich, der würde einfach in alle Redaktios beißen. Der würde einfach immer Ja sagen. Darf man Haustiere farmen? Ja. Darf man Menschen farmen? Ja. Tschüss.
Christian science, as we've kind of explained, is quite weak. It's quite patchy. You have to draw from different bits of data. But ethics is based on our own head, based on our own.
Und dann versteht man, ach, deswegen bist du ein Karnivor. Genau deswegen bist du ja einer. Weil du Tierrechte und Menschenrechte ablehnst. Deswegen bist du der, wer du bist.
Opinion and feel.
Well, it's based
I
on
know
our
people that are-
preferences.
Jo, 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 was geht? Ohne Kati, keine Party. So sieht's aus.
Wo ist Kati? Kati ist immer noch im Urlaub. Die
Wo ist
würde aber
Kati?
später. Also wenn ich noch eine Stunde streamen würde, würde Kati noch kommen, ja.
It is
Preferences subjective. There's no
Dank für die Beats.
objective measure. Therefore, neither of us cannot prove or disprove the other one.
well, right.
Neither of us can not prove or disprove the other one. Ja, das ist ja genau das Falsche. Man kann dich ja widerlegen, das ist doch der ganze Punkt.
Well, you can prove somebody is being internally inconsistent. That is something that you can prove.
Perhaps, yeah.
And I think if you do value consistency, then if you have an inconsistent moral view, then that would suggest you'd have to change. But again,
Heute 3 T-Shirt bekommen. Nicht vegan sein ist nicht okay und habe mich mega gefreut.
Meinst du Views oder was? 3000 Views bekommen? Oder was ist 3T? 3000 Views? Ja, 3000 Views ist super viel. Super nice, Mann.
care about animals, and
Vielen Dank für die Mega-Donation. Holy moly.
I think it is a meaningful discussion to have. And again, we've been getting along fairly fine. So if
Ach, T-Shirts hast du bekommen. Ja, das ist nice. Das ist echt super.
you ever want to come on my channel again and debate ethics, just message me.
Ja, warum ist die Schrift jetzt kleiner geworden? What?
Sure, I appreciate it. Yeah, cheers. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Like I said, I've been following you for a long time. I'm not as much of an arsehole as what I probably come about online. But I do put on an act for my videos. I do put on a mask, and that is deliberate. And it does seem to drive more traffic to my channel. But otherwise, I'm a pretty open ear to listen to people's different points of views. I'm not a nasty bastard. So yeah,
Oh
maybe
yeah,
we can
I
look
wanted
at down
to
the line
ask,
doing it, but
are you natty?
of course I'm not.
No, okay.
I'm about 20 kilos
but-
too heavy to be natural.
Dude,
Yeah.
I have a friend who is natural his whole life. You would swear to God, that dude's on steroids. There's some genetic freak, so I just wanted to ask. But you have a pretty good
Yeah, no
physique.
worries. Cheers. Yeah, I'm pretty open about it. I just don't discuss it.
Sure.
As in, the thing is, I do get a lot of young people come to my channel. I got a guy ask me yesterday who's about 15. Like, you shouldn't be asking me about drugs. You should be asking me about how you
Yeah.
get in
Well,
protein
yeah,
each day.
if I ever went on steroids, which I might in the future, but probably not, I wouldn't share my cycle because I don't want to encourage anybody to take what I'm taking.
Yeah, absolutely. People do that, and they think I'm being disingenuous. I'm not. I'm honest. I made a video of how to work out if someone is natural or not. Like, I even winked in the video and made it so obvious. Like, I'm obviously not natural, but
You want to do a bicep comparison?
we'll do a quick one.
All right, pretty good gains. I just hurt my elbow. I can't really flex my left arm. That's why I'm not doing it. But
I did biceps at some point recently, so they're sore. But yeah, they're getting there. I'm very lean at the moment. I'm like 5 or 6% body fat or below, so I have no pop at all.
Yeah.
Flat as fuck.
yeah, I'm dieting too.
Nice one. Yeah. Yeah, should we wrap it up here then? You're happy?
Yeah, thanks for coming by. I think this was a good discussion, but again, if you ever want to debate any other like more specific nutrition topics, like maybe just have a debate dedicated to cholesterol or diabetes or something, we could do that. And if you want to have the ethics debate, feel free. Just message me.
Sure. I'd like to see a debate with you and Bart K at some point. That'd be very entertaining.
You can't debate him. He has no epistemic standards. He just appeals to his own expertise, and he just yells and like calls you Charlie Brown. And on top of that, I don't like how he's doxed people. My wife is also like super nervous about that with me debating him because he debated 2 other friends of mine, and after the debates, he ended up doxing them. He found out like where the one person worked and got his followers to like message his fucking clinic and give bad reviews. So I don't know, like all that combined, I don't think it's gonna happen.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm not sure about any of that, so I can't say that's true. Here's a friend of mine, but I know him on a different kind of level. I don't know how much of what he said's true, and obviously I built up a relationship with him over the past 4 or 5 years, so I'm not going to say you're wrong or he's wrong. I don't know. I've got no stance of the opinion, but like I said, he is a friend. I think with a bit of convincing, if it was possible at some time in the future, you'd have a good debate. Just keep it fucking lighthearted and don't swear at each other.
I don't know if it's possible with him, dude. I don't know.
It's hard with everyone nowadays. Yeah, no. Anyway,
All right,
enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks very much. Yeah, cheers, nice one.
Alrighty.
Der guckt heimlich auf Ella, guckt er das an.
There we are. Give me 1 second. I guess we'll... If any of you have any questions... There's the Streamlabs link. Common Vegan Gains W, well, thank you. Yeah, I didn't expect him to change his opinion after the debate. I just wanted to, give the evidence, so hopefully his own audience can kind of see the carnivore diet isn't that great. And I was able to shoehorn in, some ethics.
Ja, das muss man auch keinem Menschen erklären, mit dem alles geistig okay ist, dass die Carnivore Diet nicht gut ist. Das musst du niemandem erklären. Geh zu deiner Oma, geh zu deiner Mutter und erzähl denen, Carnivore Diet ist gut. Die werden dir einen Vogel zeigen, weil das schon für die rein intuitiv unlogisch ist.
My question is, are you vegan gains? I am indeed vegan gains. This retard cool man said you would die in 30 seconds if he fought you. I don't think he would. Doubt it. The debate wasn't so much of a Q&A. he was asking questions, which is, just fine. I just wanted to provide the best evidence, for the proposition that a carnivore dietary pattern is less ideal than a plant-based dietary pattern. What's for breakfast? I'm hungry. My breakfast is just going to be 300 grams of blueberries blended up into a smoothie. Healthiest body fat percentage range, probably be around like 15 to 20%. Probably lower isn't necessarily worse for you or better for you. Kind of depends. Brian Johnson, he's at a very low body fat percentage, and he needs to be on TRT because of that. So I don't know if the benefits of being at a lower body fat percentage are negated by being on TRT. Are you taking finasteride or some hair loss stuff, and why not? I am not taking finasteride. Some people say my hairline's receding. It's not. I just have a big forehead, and if you look at my older videos, I've always had that same hairline. So my hairline hasn't receded. My dad didn't start losing his hair until I think he was in his 60s. So I think I have pretty good genes in terms of like keeping my hair. I may just start going on finasteride anyway. There seems to be some like anti-cancer benefits to it, and if I can keep my hair longer anyway, like why not? Debate me vegan if you think vegan diet is optimal. Message me on Instagram or something for debate, or maybe catch me in the next stream. I'm dieting too. Do you think a low-fat diet is better for weight loss? If you control for calories, no. You don't lose fat any faster if you're on a low-fat diet. You may personally find it's easier to stick to a diet if it's low in fat, and you may find you have greater satiety. So it's kind of an individual thing, but as long as calories are controlled for, there's no benefit. Last stream you said that you could eat a very low amount of fat for negative outcomes, but you admitted you didn't provide the number. What's the minimum fat you can consume, not get fucked? It's pretty goddamn low. I think like 10 grams of total fat is like the lowest you can possibly go. Generally speaking, I'd recommend not going below 10% of total calories. But again, most people do best at 20 to 30% of total calories coming from fat. All right, well, that's it for the stream. Hope you guys had fun. I'll be streaming later today, so I'll see you all then. And I'll keep the stream up because it's a debate. So for those of you who didn't see it, you can just watch it later. All right, take care.
Okay, jetzt sind wir aber fertig. Ja, was soll ich sagen? Super, super interessant. Eigentlich so, wie ich erwartet habe. Okay, der Typ ist schlimmer, als ich erwartet habe eigentlich. Aber ja, ganz cool. Viele Informationen, viel Wissen. Super Sache.